morning, everyone. This is Kate Lambert-Lee with MWR Battle Creek. And today we're going to have Allie Rogers, who is a community nutrition instructor with MSU Extension. We've had her before. If you were here, we had nutrition food labels. I think, did we do food safety too?
Yeah, I
We
think
have a
we've done food safety and then reading a nutrition facts label.
Yes. So some really great ones, and I've enjoyed her every time she's presented. And today she's going to bring us some more options on how we can decrease fat, sugar, and salt, which are things that chase after me, and I have a hard time saying no to. So um, I hope you guys enjoy it. She has emailed me the presentation. If you would like a copy of that, email mwrbattlecreek@dla.mil. We also will post the presentation afterwards, as we always do, the recording on our MWR video page. If ever you have any questions, always reach out to us. We want to make sure that we're offering you the best programming, and it's your programming that we want to make sure that we provide. So after all that, welcome, Allie. Great to have you, and welcome everybody else for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Kate. So yeah, again, I'm Allie. My pronouns are she, her, and her, so feel free to use that. I did throw into the chat just a quick presentation survey, if anybody would be willing to fill that out, for two reasons. One, that helps with my funding so I can continue to do my programming at no cost to you. And then two, it proves to my bosses I did something today. All the information in there is kept confidential and completely voluntary. So feel free to fill that out. And without further ado, we will jump into it. So I am curious, throw in the chat if you were in my last presentation, the reading a nutrition facts label, because I am interested to see who's been doing that, or throw in there if you have read an interesting nutrition facts label since we had that presentation. Awesome. So we've got some returners. I love that. So I'm doing one of my favorite presentations, decreasing fat, salt, and sugar. The reason I like this / also hate it is, like Kate said, this is kind of the tough one to say no to these things because they're very addictive and they're kind of in everything. Fat, salt, and then specifically added sugar. And so does anyone know the difference between a natural sugar and an added sugar? And you can feel free to unmute or you can throw that in the chat. What's that difference between natural and added sugars? If you were on my last presentation, we did talk about it. Also, I do apologize if there is some noise happening. They have decided that this morning is the best morning to do construction right outside my window. So if it does kind of get a little bit loud, I apologize for that. So the big difference between natural and added sugar, it's kind of in the name, right? You can think natural sugar naturally occurs in food. If I was to take a strawberry, I'd take a bite of it, it's sweet. Oh yeah, and we've got somebody in the chat put that, right? It's naturally occurring in that food. So strawberry, it's sweet. I take that strawberry, I dip it in chocolate. I've now added a sugar that didn't naturally come on there, right? Even if that sugar comes from a natural source. So chocolate made with cocoa powder, cocoa beans, even honey or syrup, right? Comes from trees, but it is still an added sugar because it didn't naturally occur in that food. Or if I took an apple, great natural sugar, gives me that quick energy to get up, get moving, get going, versus an apple pie, right? I put a lot of sugar in there, probably also put a fair amount of salts, butter, and fat too. So we're gonna think about how do we make these better decisions here? I'm gonna skip through this. What I want us to be mindful of is not to fear these things or to think that they're super bad for us. I'm never going to tell y'all you can't ever have apple pie or that chocolate covered strawberry ever again. You can't ever have something with fat or salt in it. That would be silly because one, it's really hard to avoid these things 100% of the time. And two, we should enjoy food. Food is fantastic. That's why I went to school to learn more about food because it's amazing. But it's also important that we have this really good understanding and foundational knowledge of how food, good or bad, can impact our health. And we're the ones making those decisions. So I'm never going to be like, you can't ever have dessert. You can have it. We're just thinking how much, how often, and really what is it that I'm having? When we think about fat specifically, we want to think about the difference between saturated and unsaturated fats. So I know your cameras aren't on. If you want to turn your cameras on, I love seeing faces, but I'm not going to force anybody to. But I will ask you to do this with me. So make a heart with your hands, put it over your own heart. So when we think about fats, we can kind of think about which ones are heart healthy and which ones are not so heart healthy. So our heart healthy ones are unsaturated. So they also think about like the kind of term or the word saturated, like it's really saturated in grease. So the unsaturated would be not so saturated in things. These are heart healthy. So these are going to be fats that are found liquid at room temperature. Think olive oil, vegetable oil, canola oil, or the fats we find in fish and seafood and nuts and seeds. Maybe we've heard of omega-3s or omega-6 fatty acids. Heart healthy. Of course, that doesn't mean that I can just like over consume and eat an entire jar of peanut butter at one time, but those are the ones I want to go for. Then we have to break our heart because our heart gets a little bit sad. And these are the saturated or trans fats. These are not as heart healthy. We want to limit these. These are solid at room temperature. So think butter, margarine, shortening, the fat we find in meat or other animal products. And so these ones not being so heart healthy, we really want to focus on limiting these as best as possible. We're also going to find these in a lot of processed foods and junk foods and luxury treat foods that we might want to be mindful. Again, how often am I having that? So unsaturated, heart healthy, break that heart, saturated, and trans fats. I think that's always a helpful way for me to remember that. If it's not helpful, well, you got to do something silly for the day. So not to fear them, again, it's just how we're identifying them. And again, when we read our nutrition facts label for our folks that are returning and thinking about that, we actually can see on a nutrition facts label which ones are saturated and which ones are unsaturated. Most nutrition facts labels will just label saturated and trans fats. And we have to do a little bit of the math from our total fats, subtract saturated and trans, and that's going to leave us with the rest. But they will at least identify which ones are saturated and trans fats. So I'll take a second as I went through our crash course of fats. Any questions so far? All right. And again, feel free to either use the raise hand feature, just unmute and shout your question at me, or you can throw that in the chat there. So this should look familiar to some of us. I'm sure at some point in our life, we have all seen a nutrition facts label. So this might not be as exciting for you as it is for me. The nutrition facts labels actually changed last year, which was very exciting for, for those of us in the nutrition or dietetic world. We love this. But there have been some updates. You may have noticed this too. So some things are the calories is bolder, it's bigger. We also have our serving size bolded. Can anyone tell me what is the difference between a serving size and a servings per container? What is the difference between those? And for our question in the chat, the heart healthy fats, the question in the chat for those who are calling in is which fat do we want? So heart healthy fats are going to be called unsaturated liquid at room temperature. And the not so heart healthy fats are saturated or trans fats. Again, I think of that kind of visualization of saturation. So I think of maybe like something that's really greasy, like maybe some fast food, French fries that are just covered in grease, like really saturated. We know that those are probably not as great for us. Versus if I was to bake my own French fries, not as greasy, those are going to be more heart healthy. And then in the chat, so we have a guess for our question. The serving size is what you need to eat to get the calories listed. Yes, so our serving size is just that sort of recommendation to eat, and it accounts for everything below here. So 230 calories, one serving. Servings per container is, yeah, how much you have in the entire container, the whole box, the bag, the tube, the tub, whatever your food's coming in. So in this made up food, if I were to eat the entire container, I would have to multiply everything down here by 8. Now I'm going to do that because that seems like a lot of food, but I'm going to have to do that. So sometimes this can be kind of sneaky and tricky. And of course, MSU Extension doesn't discriminate or advocate for any specific brands. With that being said, that's my fun legal disclaimer. But with that being said, does anybody know, if we're familiar with the Little Debbie oatmeal cream pies, does anybody know what the serving size for those is? And you can take a guess in the chat. What do you think the serving size is for Little Debbie's oatmeal cream pie? If you have one in front of you, no cheating. All right, so I've got some guesses for 2. It is 1/3 of a cookie. The serving size is 1/3 of a cookie, which means if you ate one of those cookies, you would be eating 3 servings. And yes, to whoever said wow in the chat, I agree. When I found that out, I thought that's wild. That's like 1 layer is a serving. Who here just stops at essentially 1 bite of the cookie? I wouldn't, right? The cookies are pretty small anyway. They're not very big. But that is something we have to pay attention to when it comes to looking at our nutrition facts label is how many servings am I having? Any ramen noodle fans in here? Anybody like to eat the ramen noodles? Those like block packages? The serving size for one of those brick block packages is actually, there's 2 servings per container. So I don't know anybody who just eats half of the brick and then puts the other brick away to eat later. Most people are probably eating the whole thing. We have to multiply everything by 2. So that adds up. Specifically, when we're looking at where our saturated and trans fats are, that sodium or salt, and of course, added sugar. That's another big change that just happened. We used to not have to require added sugar being listed on here. It's now on there. So put in the chat, is added sugar an essential nutrient? Yes or no? Exactly. The answer is no. It's not an essential nutrient. We don't need it. And I'm just also, I want to check up on one thing else in the chat. So a question was, why would the serving not be at least 1 cookie, referring to that oatmeal cookie? Why do companies break up a serving as 1/3? And that is a great question. Here's kind of why. It depends on the company and the brand. First, their goal is to sell a product. It's not really to think about our individual health. That's what their job is. That's what they do. And if they were to put 1 cookie as 1 serving, you would notice that not only would the calories go up, it might skyrocket in terms of sodium or added sugar. So when I mentioned the ramen noodles, if you were to eat that whole package, that block brick of ramen noodles, you would actually be getting about all of the salt, sodium that you need for the entire day in that one. And maybe you're also one of those folks who likes to put salt on top of that, or seasoning salt or something like that. You're actually getting the amount of sodium you need from that, which might deter people from purchasing it. So sometimes it's a marketing campaign or advertising. That's why. But back to our added sugar, it's not essential. We don't need it. What might happen to our bodies if we overconsume added sugar for a long period of time? And I'll wait because I'm sure there are some vigorous typers putting it in there. So it could get stored as fat. So extra energy that we don't use, our body says, cool, let me store it for later, which can be great in some situations because sometimes we have to go a certain amount of time without eating. So we can store it, use it for later. But got to be mindful about how much we're having and how much it might weigh down on our organs. It could also increase our risk for type 2 diabetes. It can increase our risk for high blood pressure or high blood sugar. Yes. All right, and then we have another question here. What is the difference of total sugars versus added sugars? Yeah, and in this example, we have total sugars equaling 12 and then added sugars equaling 10. So this is saying that we have this mixture of our natural sugars, naturally occurring sugars, and our added sugars. And just like with the fats, they're not always going to list out everything. They do make us do some math. We're never getting away from math, right? If anybody remembers back in school when we were in elementary school, we're like, I'm never going to use math. Math is everywhere. So this says here, I have 12 grams total sugars. Out of those, 10 of them are added, which would mean how many are the naturally occurring sugars? I know I'm making you do math. 2, yeah, gold star to Rob. 2 grams added sugar or 2 grams natural sugar. So if I looked at that and just kind of compared, okay, 10 of them are added and 2 of them are natural, that's a big difference. That's a lot. So we really got to be mindful of these things and how much it adds up. So let's practice a little bit. We're going to think about foods being red light foods, yellow light foods, or green light foods. Or we could think of them as go foods, slow foods, and whoa foods. So a green go food would be foods that I want all the time, right? Multiple times a day. These are the foods that have little to no salt, sodium, and I'll use those terms interchangeably, added sugar, and those saturated trans fats. Our yellow foods, I want to start being a little bit more mindful of. These might be one time a day, maybe a couple times a week I have these. They might have a small amount of added sugar, a little bit more sodium, and maybe some of those saturated and trans fats, but not a lot. But again, like I said, I'm not going to be having these all the time. And then our red light whoa foods. These are the foods where I move back a little bit and I say like, hold on, wait a minute. How often am I having these? Think of these as luxury foods, treat foods. So ice cream, candy, really sugary beverages, cake, stuff like that. Things we can still enjoy, but are usually used as a treat or a celebration or a luxury food. And I can have a slice of pie, but I don't want to have the entire pie, right? Starting to really focus on what that portion size is and what that moderation looks like for me. So let me take one quick second and ask, are there any other questions? All right, so here's how we're going to practice. We're going to do some physical activity together. So I'm going to encourage everybody to stand up. You can do some of these in your chair, but I'm going to encourage y'all to stand up with me and do this, because when we think about the foods that we're eating, we think about what we're putting into our body, we also have to think about how we're using that energy up, how we use up the nutrients we're getting. So, you know, we're not only going to talk the talk, we're going to walk the walk together. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to practice that go slow whoa, and I'm going to back up a little bit so you can see me. Oh, I don't know if my dress looks as funky in your cameras. It doesn't mine because of the stripes. So I'm sorry if that makes anybody kind of dizzy. So if you think this food is a go food, I will have you march in place. And then if you think a food is a slow food, you can either bend over and touch your toes, or if you are sitting in your chair, I will have you reach your hands up to the sky. And then if you think this is a whoa food, one of those red light foods, we're going to do some arm circles. And you can also throw your answer in the chat. So let me go back to sharing my screen. So let's think of these again in terms of the added sugar, salt, and saturated fats. So coffee. Is coffee a go food, a slow food, or a whoa food? What do you think? And you can, again, unmute or throw it in the chat. So yes, it does depend. We have that in the chat. Depends on the sugar and the creamer. So black coffee by itself, I would say we could make this a go food. Of course, caffeine does dehydrate us, and it's not going to count towards my water consumption. But as long as I have this in moderation, I have a cup of coffee right here, right next to me. I usually have a cup of coffee just about every morning. So that's okay. But when I start to add a lot of sugar, a lot of creamers, I might just skip right down to a whoa in there. I think about some of those gourmet coffees you find at some of those specialty shops that have, you know, a couple inches of whipped cream at the top, and they drizzle it all with the caramel or chocolate. That adds up, and that changes it for sure. What about a soda or a soda pop, whatever you decide you like to call it? What do you think about that? What do you think about soda? That is a stop food. It is a whoa food. Yes, it is a whoa food because of the added sugar and sometimes the caffeine, excuse me, and sometimes the salt too, but the biggest thing is that added sugar. So that one adds up very, very quickly. So when we even think about certain sodas like a cola, a 12-ounce can of cola has about 40 grams of added sugar in it. It is not recommended that you exceed 50 grams of added sugar in a day. So one can of soda has already given us almost all the sugar that we could have for the entire day. So that's why we're going to make that a red light, a whoa food. What about a sports drink? Like a Gatorade, Powerade, whatever it is. Slow food. I would agree. I would say that this is a good slow food to be mindful of. So who do they typically market these drinks to? Athletes, right? Athletes, really athletic people, sporty people, sometimes kids. Yeah, there's a lot of marketing to kids on this, but we typically see in the commercials or billboards, athletes, really athletic, sporty people, which can be very beneficial. When I am sweating a lot and losing electrolytes, I want to replenish those. And sometimes a sports drink can do that really quickly. However, does anybody know what there tends to be a lot of in these sports drinks? Too much of, besides the added sugar? Salt, yes. So salt's an electrolyte. It does help to balance our body fluids. But if I'm just chilling on the couch or sitting in my office, I probably don't need to be replenishing those electrolytes, specifically salt, as quickly as I would by drinking one of these sports drinks. Also, has anyone ever drank one of these and not felt thirsty after you drink it? Or you start to drink it, you're like, I'm still thirsty, and I'm drinking more and more. It's because there's a lot of salt in there. What about water? Go slow or whoa? Yeah, all caps, Rob. This is a go food. Water is an essential nutrient. We have to have it. Does anybody know how much water do you need every single day? And if you were in my last presentation, I do believe we talked about this. How much water do you need? So we got to guess for a gallon. Any other guesses? All right, so I think this was K, gold star to K, half of your body weight in ounces. Yes, the old recommendation did used to be about 64 ounces, but we realize everybody's different. If our energy and calorie needs and our other nutrient needs vary by different factors, why shouldn't our water? And so it is based on your body weight, half your body weight in ounces. If somebody weighed 200 pounds, how many ounces of water would they need? Somebody weighed 200. What do they need? Yeah, 100 ounces, exactly. And it's okay if we're not quite there yet, if we're not drinking as much water as we thought we needed, right? Rome wasn't built in a day. It can take time, and that's perfectly okay. Start by increasing that more and more. The benefits to drinking water, besides we know it's essential, it's going to help us to reduce down on maybe some of those sugary beverages because I'm drinking more water instead of things like sodas or sports drinks or gourmet coffees. It also helps to balance out when we have things like too much salt, because sometimes we will have those treat foods and we can't get away from it. That's going to help balance it out more. So thinking about those 3 nutrients we're trying to decrease: added sugar, saturated fats, and sodium or salt. So we already talked about the added sugar. We want to stay below 50 grams of added sugar every day. Again, it's not essential. So, the more we can stay under, the better. But at minimum, we don't want to exceed that 50 grams. For sodium, put in the chat, is sodium an essential nutrient? What do you think? Do I have to have sodium? Yes. And yes to that answer as well. Yes, some. So sodium is essential. It does help to balance our body's fluids. It also helps with a lot of other functions within our body. But we don't need too much sodium. Our body really only needs about 1,500 milligrams, so much, much smaller than a gram of sodium every single day. It is not recommended that we exceed 2,300 milligrams of salt in a day. On average, most adults here in the US are consuming about 3,500 to 4,500 milligrams of salt. And what might happen to my body if I'm over consuming salt over a long period of time? What are some of those health effects? Having too much salt. What do we think? Yeah, it can increase my risk for higher blood pressure. Also, it can make you kind of thirsty because it dehydrates you. Who, when we started talking about water, immediately thought, I'm kind of thirsty right now, or like grab the water or something next to them to drink because we started talking about it. I definitely did. I was like, oh, I could use some water right now. So increases that risk for high blood pressure, hypertension, can also increase our risk for dehydration, for swelling, for heart disease. So some pretty significant things that we want to try to reduce, and we want to be mindful of how much sodium we're having. So again, we only need 1,500 milligrams. It's not recommended we exceed that 2,300 milligrams. And then for our saturated fats. So again, not a heart healthy fat. I'm trying to lower this. It is not recommended that we exceed 22 grams of saturated fats in a day. And trans fats, I mentioned those, we don't need those. So really limiting those as best as possible, but no more than 22 grams of saturated fats in a day. So ways we can limit that is getting protein sources that have less of that. So lean protein like chicken, turkey, seafood, or plant-based proteins, or getting cuts of red meat that have less fat on them, switching from a 2% or whole milk to 1% or low no fat milk, right? Making just smaller switches can help to reduce that. But again, staying under that 22 grams of saturated fat. Any questions or thoughts about that before I move us forward? One other interesting thing that I like to share, if you have questions, put them in the chat, but I like to look at this chart, and I apologize if it's kind of small, but this is a list of different names for added sugars that makes it kind of sneaky. So on the nutrition facts label, we now can see how many grams of added sugars, but we might not notice what they come from. Or in other things, maybe recipes, we're wondering, like, is this considered an added sugar? Here are some of the names just besides the word sugar. So obviously some of them say it, like cane sugar. Okay, cool. I know that's a sugar. But some of these sound kind of healthy. So I look at things like date sugar or even beet sugar. Well, this comes from fruits and vegetables. So why can't I consider that an added sugar? It's way more concentrated, right? Even fruit juice and fruit juice concentrate. So one thing we got to be mindful of when it comes to fruit juices is the percent of actual fruit juice in there. A hot minute ago, I had gone to the store to buy some cranberry juice. And if anybody's ever drank cranberry juice, you know it's not sweet. I was in a hurry, wasn't thinking about looking at the nutrition facts label. I was just looking at the front. And on the front of this, it said 100%. So I thought, oh, cool, perfect. This is what I need. Grab it, let's go. I go home, I taste it. It is way too sweet. I'm like, there's no way this is regular cranberry juice. And so I flip it over and I finally read the nutrition facts label. And at the very top, it says contains 15% fruit juice. So I was kind of confused, thinking, what's going on here? Flip it back over to the front where I had that giant 100. The 100 had a tiny asterisk. I follow the asterisk down to the footnote that said contains 100% of the vitamin C you need for the day. Not 100% fruit juice. Only 15% of it, which means the rest of it was water and added sugar, amongst like other things like dyes and different preservatives, but mostly added sugar and water. And so that's where we have to also be mindful about these things. It can say something on the front that sounds really great, but I got to flip it over to the back to verify. Yeah, it's very sneaky for whoever put that in the chat. So that's why we have to be the smart shoppers, the cool consumers, and understand kind of how this works a little bit better. Other things that might sound good, again, maple syrup, molasses, even rice syrup, or honey, right? Honey comes from bees, it's got to be good. And not to say that these are bad things, it's just I have to be mindful of how much I'm having, because when I have these and add them into things instead of a natural sugar, I'm only getting the sugar from that food. So from the beet sugar, I'm only getting the sugar from it. I'm not getting the other nutrients that comes in a beet because it's just concentrated sugar. Versus if I was to eat a beet or, eat a strawberry or an orange, I'm getting that natural sugar, but I'm also getting vitamin C or vitamin A. I'm also going to get some water content in there too. So that's why we want to try to eat foods in their most natural state or as whole as possible. And I'm not talking about like Whole Foods, the store. I mean, a whole apple versus apple juice or an orange versus orange juice. And with that, I will stop and ask for any last thoughts, comments, questions, concerns, compliments, your credit card numbers. I'm just kidding. But any questions about what we covered today? I will again put in the chat my survey link for those that maybe joined us a little bit later and did not see that. If you can take a quick minute or two to fill that out for me, I would greatly appreciate it. There is also a place on there to fill out if you're interested in doing my full series. Again, no cost to you, but I do have longer series where we really dive deeper into this stuff. Ooh, great question. What would I like to see on labeling that would be an improvement? And so I'm also, for this question, I do have two of my interns on today, Tina and Hannah. So Tina and Hannah, if you're still on with us, I would love to get your input as well. These are dietetics interns. And so our question is, what would we like to see on nutrition facts labels that would be an improvement? I will say I do like the new change to the added sugar. I really love that. I would like to see more of the different essential vitamins and minerals. Typically, they only require about 4 key ones on there. I'd like to see more of those, but I think the changes that they've made recently are helpful. They've also made a change on putting allergens on there. So any of the big top 8 allergens are now on the ingredients list, and they have to make a little disclaimer. I think that's really helpful. I have an allergy to chocolate. I never see that on there, but I know that for other people with allergies, it's really helpful. Ooh, question, tips for eating out. My tip when it comes to eating out is try to make the best decision for yourself, right? Always remember, if I can make it at home, make it myself, I can control what's going in it. I'm also going to save myself some money because it's going to be less expensive because I'm not paying for somebody else to make it. But other things you can do is order once, eat twice. So right when your food comes, ask for a box or a container and take half of it and put it aside already so that you won't overeat then at that one time, and you'll have a second meal ready to go. Or see if you can get a half order of something so that you're not having the whole thing. And if you do go out to eat, you're treating yourself, you can balance that out throughout the rest of the day by making sure that everything else you're eating is lower in things like added sugar, salt, and saturated fats. Any other questions or thoughts? All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining. I am so happy that you all keep inviting me back and that you like me, because I love presenting. You do always have great questions. I appreciate the participation and engagement. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, a great rest of your week. Enjoy the warm weather. It's going to be 80 for like 4 days. I'm so excited. My skin has not seen the sun in a very long time, so I'm very excited. Wear sunscreen, stay hydrated, and have a great rest of your week.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and we look forward to more presentations. If there's ever anything we can do, email us at mwrbattlecreek@dla.mil. Thanks, and have a great rest of your day.